وخمار شوي اريا كروسوك.
Artenia Shinla, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Walking the Crossroads. This is your host, Patrick O.C., aka Shadowed Sin. Tonight we're going to be finally picking up our lore discussion on the art of Tekken Sai and the different ways on how magic in the land and the stars is utilized. Now, I'm going to be playing this a little bit less structured than before, and because I've kind of practiced a few times, so we're going to jump right into it. So, as a quick review, and just overview of what we've been talking about, Tekken Sai is the psionic abilities utilized by mutants known as Psionics. There's many different ways to use these powers, and they can express in multiple different combinations. We've been talking recently about the three ways on how this is actually controlled. Those are the arts, these being thaumaturgy, tarot, and invocation. Currently, we're going to be talking about tarot, which is also known as the art of ways, or in Elder tongue, Yelen Ere Hirien. The users of this ability are called Tarospects or Tarospices, and are also, this is linked to the archetypes for the races, for different races, particularly the Guagara, the Soul Given, and the Feyre, and their respective, that would be the Branwiga, the Tech Knight, and the Champion archetypes. These are kind of like classes. So, let's talk about the lore. So, the Art of Ways is it's a more direct, violent form. Unlike thaumaturgy, which is very big on displacement, Taro is basically follows the philosophy of engagement, which is that you're direct in the thick of battle. If you watch Bleach, if you've watched, actually Bleach is a fantastic example. You're using magic through your weapon, okay? So let's just look at the wiki page a bit here. To know movement, to know perception, is to know victory. So the history of how this works is that the origins themselves are very confused. There's many different, theories. The biggest one being that the first true users of Tarot, or Proto-Tarot, if you will, were the Knights Imperial. They were a super soldier group which first began as a sort of bodyguard of the Olgan dynasty in the Old Empire, and eventually they became their own, existent military order. They then eventually went to war with an assassin brotherhood called the Mercurial Brotherhood, which was controlled by one of the major religions, and then eventually they fell during a period of time after the Dark Years, or the major invasions by the one of the Guagara subspecies. Well, so the Knights Imperial were historically able to wield flame, lightning, and other elements and other weird powers in combat. Now, this inspired others, and these, Tarospects, or warriors, eventually became the pseudo pre-errants. Now, from this warrior background, there's a lot of these different ideologies. So, like the chivalric code, or Bushido we see in the real world, these warriors adopted something which are called the Sword Oaths, which we will discuss a little bit after this. So, yeah, this is kind of a little bit summarized of what's been going on, but I feel it'd be better to do this since we've been going for so long and we need a bit of a break. So let's talk a bit more about how this works, and I'm going to paraphrase this, and then we're going to eventually link the wiki once it's further into development. So, as I've said, this is a system that focuses primarily on engagement. All of this ability and power is wielded through a specialized form of weapon called a deck. A deck allows a user to effectively charge their magical energy into the weapon and then sling it or throw it out of the weapon. Momentarily, a mental connection exists with the errant, the Genetic in question, with their weapon and with the energy within, which allows them to shape it. So, decks specifically are romanticized Genetic weapons that are found. They're all over the triad. They're primarily used by the Tarospex and the Farron houses. They're generally bladed weapons, but a few of them can be a little bit different. And they do draw directly from the implants that the tech user has. This is how it works. A user charges their deck, and then they can dispel the energy from it by direction. This is called a charge. Literally charging the weapon. So here's an example. Aisha ran forward as her weapon began to swing wildly with energy. Energy built up along her weapon as she charged it, then swung it once again, sending a wave of focused air. So in that moment, Aisha is unleashing a air bending move, if you will, or aerokinesis, and she's controlling it using her weapon. Then there's a second thing about this. Charges can either be expelled or held within the weapon itself. When the energy saps along the blade of a deck, letting the user enhance their melee fighting skill. So you can basically, by holding air, you can move faster. With fire, you can heat your blade. With cryokinesis, you can create an aura around it. So this allows you to kind of extend it. You can hold the charge in and create a magical aura around the weapon. We'll learn more about that when we get to invocation, because that's a more complex form of it. But it's basically, here's a further example. Aisha then brought about a focused cyclone of air that bent around her sword and began to extend outward. So she didn't just charge and create an air. She actually controlled the air around the weapon. So they can also act like wands in a way. There's another form which is called dealing the deck. One of the more irksome aspects of being a Taro species is the ability known as dealing, which allows the Tarospex to manipulate their charges after release. This requires them to focus and channel power into their deck, and then a connection is formed between the two charges, and the user is able to deal. You can basically control entities from summoning and projects of illusion. So Aisha was soon assaulted by a wave of fear. She felt her senses being assaulted. Her enemy was dealing a sensory illusion that was forcing her to attempt to overpower. They would need to deal the energy from their weapon after discharging a blast of energy at her. Damn it, she thought. So effectively what they're doing is you deal the energy, and then you have to basically key the weapon back to a similar form of energy. You can form another mental bond. But what they're doing here is, effectively, to control energy, you have to have a similar time energy that links up. And you can only control that, you can only deal as long as you maintain a perfectly keyed form of energy. So the more proficient in concentration you are, the more accurate you can deal the deck. You have to consistently control. Otherwise, the spell will be broken, as it were. But this allows you to do some pretty cool things. So it can lead to a lot of instances of counters in Fate. So effectively, you can have someone who might be, dealing charges, almost immediately sending rocks at you, or blasts of fire. You may then have to have someone that tries to effectively maybe you try to create like a whip of air from your weapon, which allows maybe you to swing it more without having, so instead of a projectile, you can have a direct link. But then we have something even more complicated, which is called double charging. One of the more advanced form of dealing is the ability to double charge. The double charge user must deal the energy, then aim the target in their mind. They must then either aim a blast of raw energy at the target or slash them with their weapon. This forms a connection with the target area and allows the area to as a means of expelling or shifting a charge suddenly. So basically, if someone hits a specific thing, so if you have a bottle and you hit it with a blast of air, that bottle holds a residual amount of energy, which then you can use to expel more energy. So what you're doing is you're transferring the energy from your deck to that location, and then it does the charge. It's one of the really weird things that it can do. One final means of manipulating for the double charge is to envelop the user with one of their powers. This could be a bomb with an effigy, surrounding themselves with a projected field of illusion, affects anyone that comes closer, or even wreathe themselves in flame. To envelop themselves, a user must first charge their deck, then extend it around themselves. Then a secondary charge is applied, and the first charge is dealt to a fixed area around or on the body. This lets the user, for a short period of time, cover themselves in power and direct it for a limited amount of time. You can effectively fling air across the air, fling like a blast of fire or ice across the air, and then charge it and create traps. Or you can wreathe yourself in fire and come at your opponent. And so this is where you get a lot of fun. And so think about it this way. If you want to fly as an errant, you could, if you're someone who uses gyromancy, the ability to redirect, gyrokinesis, the ability to control gravity, you can create walls of gravity that you control. You just have to link with that target residual energy. And pardon the pug, he's in the background making noises again. Or you can cover yourself in this. So it's a limited, but it does have some abilities. So we're now going to jump and talk about the sword oaths, because this directs what a Tarospex thinks and how they consider. Okay, I am bound to my oath as a keeper of the sword, says the quote at the top of the wiki page, and let's talk about it. Many years ago, there exists a discontinuity of thought on the acts of war and the usage of burgeoning scythe power. Many Tarospex speculated on how to best utilize their powers of the earth. One of the strongest theories was that of the Jade Dragon School on Yomi, which profess, we walk through the void, and the void removes all that we are. When we are lost, we are made stronger with purpose. Central to the sword oaths is the belief in the void, the totality of feeling that is then subsumed through submission of the will. Most, if not all, religions give the name Void as a horrendous, hellish god. But to Tarospices and the followers of the Oaths this is what governs greater things such as lordship and the acts of war. How one interacts with the will of Psi and the power of tech is part of the oath. Because everything about a Tarospex and the Tarospices is so war-focused, they adopt these very specific concepts of they're a very martial bunch of people. Okay? So the Sword Oaths are the competing ideologies that allow them to how they apply everything. There's a cornerstone to this, and that is the Ebon Book, which has what are known as the 5 considerations. These are the biggest lines that theorists often debate and they often use in the application of martial arts, theory, and even politics. There are more than 5 in the Ebon Book, but the 5 are the most debated and the most important. These are the ones that, if you're an errant, they're the ones that are going to quiz you on the most or have the most extensive things. And they are taken from different warrior heroes, different generals, different rebel leaders, and they've become the most interesting. So the first one is this. Fate fools the bold, as war never changes in its essence. Be steady, be precise, and decisive when committing yourself to the will of fate. For war, like fate, is unkind, unforgiving. The first consideration discusses the rule of fate in the face of war and politics. One of its further quote reads, "There is no love or war in politics, only advantage," a line which was later adopted into the theses of Alcée and his works on the fair and mind. Prince Sunshield of Cam wrote that war was an all-devouring creature and could only be conducted with a clear mind. No matter how different technology and killing evolved, war would always be extant and will always be about destruction and domination. To many, the first is merely an acceptance of fate, how war changes the world, but war itself never changes. So like in Fallout, our big statement from Fallout is, war never changes, and this is a fact that all Tarospecs must accept and embrace. The second consideration, only take through force when failing to earn victory through deception. Through deception, loss can be managed and greater resources attained. From the words of victory, Lady Arlette du Fitzrollo. One of the greatest acts a warrior can do is to outsmart their foe and incur a bloodless victory. This consideration teaches warriors to think before acting and to not let the tide of battle move against them. Much like the reality of war, there is a realization of how politics and war are much the same. As there is only an advantage, then one can learn to outsmart the enemy to continuously retain advantage, thus remaining steps ahead. So this is kind of based upon the notion that we often see in Sun Tzu's Art of War, which does state that the best form of war is to earn victory through the lowest amount of losing resource and the loss of life. So what the words of victory say is, effectively, the more, if you can win through deception and you can win without killing people, that's better, because then you're not losing anything. You still retain the advantage, which is what's the most important to many Feyre when it comes to their clan's way of thinking. The third consideration, move swift like the wind in a storm, and be tightly formed as the quiet wood. When you strike, do so with the fury of thunder, and when attacked, remain resolute as a mountain. The Secrets of Steel, written by Lord Jade Falcon. War and combat are about knowing when to move and how to move, when to defend and how to defend. The third consideration thus discusses the notion of how and when to maintain oneself when embroiling in the dance of war. To move like the wind speaks the mobility required to outthink and outmaneuver the enemy, which references to the second consideration. Then there's a notion that when one attacks, he must do so with force to shock the enemy and tip them off balance, which is actually a debatable translation of the meaning. When defending, says the words, be like the mountain. The elemental nature of the consideration marks it as one of the oldest and possibly dating back before the arrival of the Feyre to the worldscape, but it also is a good reference to the first and second. First, war is unforgiving. You must be steady and precise and know when to strike. Also, by understanding the movement, you can retain the advantage in war and win. Never fight a battle without honor or without guile. Fight every as if it were your last and you were already dead. The fourth consideration, the 5 rings, written by the Laughing Sword. The Laughing Sword was a warrior who fought unconventional battles against their enemies, using an oar to defeat an established swordsman, and using tracks to trick another. To the Laughing Warrior, one should never fight without honor, but never fight without being clever. Honor is a system that can be mended and bent to fit the needs of the warrior at a given time. They must always prepare to die at any time, as death is an old friend who greets them without question. What a Tarospices needs to understand is, while you can maintain the advantage, you can understand that war never changes and that fate never favors you, you must also be ready to welcome the fact that death will come and that you will eventually possibly die at the end. Be smart, but always be prepared. Finally, there's the fifth consideration, which is strange because it actually takes from a holy text, particular from, for those of you who've heard anything about the Jaded Path, you might recognize this writing. Okay, all action comes to an end and all lives end in time. Seek peace in what is to come and embrace all days as if they were your last. The manifold thought, Mensha the heir. If the laughing sword taught a warrior to accept their death, then Mensha teaches the heir all to accept the end is inevitable. To expect all things to end is an accept that failure can occur and to come to understand that opportunities are always ready to occur. To fight is what is to come is to face the oncoming storm foolishly. A warrior and soldier does not need to accede to fate, but to comprehend the end of actions means can learn to the evaluation it carefully and then beat it if possible. So what we've learned from this, the 5 considerations effectively teach you that war is a constant. It is one of the few constants in history in general. It teaches us we must always be clever and seek the advantage. It also teaches you to move and change your actions to fit what is needed at a given moment. It says you must always treat death like an old friend and expect the end to come at any time, but always be ready to fight with honor. Finally, it says that all things come to an end, but that all things have an end can also mean that by understanding how things end and the different patterns, one can then understand how to predict them and beat them. Tarospex are not only sword-wielding warriors, they are tactical-minded individuals that use their limitations to fight and wield and manipulate the movement of battle to their advantage. Whereas a thaumaturgist can sit on the sidelines and control their magic from afar, a Tarospex is constantly in motion, understanding the weight of their action and adapting to fit to where they're having to go. Thank you for talking tonight. I understand that this was a bit of an interesting experience, and I hope you guys come back for our next episode, which should be coming out sometime in the future. As the Amazons say, Vahenshush, spirits to you, and good night.